Hello and welcome back to Tiny Artist TV. Today's prompt is fabulous and the date is August 8th. For today's prompt, it is very similar to the dressed up prompt that we did a couple of days ago, that I did a couple of days ago, except for the fact that I felt more compelled to do something quote unquote high fashion, in the vein of a like drop dead gorgeous model. Excuse my bad joke, it had to be made. But I wanted to do something a little fancier, and this was actually, as far as her backstory is concerned, was actually at first inspired by, there's a book that came out a few years ago, and the title is in French, and I tried to look it up so I could get you guys the author and the accurate title, but I wasn't able to find it. But it essentially translates to dying to be thin or dying to be pretty. And it kind of highlights the author's journey or her struggle with bulimia and anorexia, and considering that that's an issue that really pervades the modeling industry with extreme diets and extreme weight loss, I wanted to kind of tackle that subject matter with this piece, and that this is a model who did end up succumbing to death by starvation. There is a second part to it in that, as you see here, I'm starting to draw out the guts. Going with the Higurashi style body horror. If you're not familiar with Higurashi, the full title is Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, and it is actually a 3-part series, but it's about this village of girls, and they are being followed by this spirit called Oyashiro-sama. And if they leave the village, the spirit causes them to go crazy. And there's actually this one girl who, she's possessed to the point where she thinks she has maggots under her skin. And so she scratches her wrist and she scratches her neck to the point where they bleed, and she has to constantly wear bandages to keep herself from scratching. So with this, the combination of that dying to be pretty or dying to be thin, and that extreme body dysmorphia, she being the model in this picture, ends up clawing her own stomach out at an attempt because she's just so frustrated with not meeting the standards of the industry that she just rips herself open and ends up dying that way. And also with that in mind, so that actually inspired the color palette for this piece as well. I wanted to go with sort of a soft reds and burgundies, and then lighter pinks and lighter grays to give it that sort of French romance feel to offset the goriness a little bit. Sorry about that. It is a little more graphic than some of my other pieces, but I did still have fun doing this. And so she ends up with this torn dress and torn skirt, and her innards are just kind of spilling out, and so we see how she did end up dying. At least she still looks good in the afterlife though, right? I think so. now I'm just setting my liner to overlay again, so I can start working on the color underneath. And for this one, I do choose to make her hair white, but I start with the gray, and so my reasoning behind that is actually or at least I prefer to do this with characters that have lighter hair, like if it's white or like a very light blonde or lavender or baby blue, you want to start with the darkest color and then build up your lights from there so that you already have a starting point where you want your shadows to be, and you can section out the hair a lot easier if you're starting from dark to light, because then you can just kind of block out where you want your highest lights to be and build your lights and shadows around each section. And here I'm just adding some more of that quote-unquote ghost fluff. I do go back in with a textured brush and give the hair a little more volume. For this one I kind of wanted to do like a 80s Farrah Fawcett, big, fluffy, voluminous, wavy locks, if you will. And then the color palette, going with that, the meaty but still light, like I said, like a French romantic pastel color palette. There's also that in recent fashion weeks I've noticed that the color palettes have been a little more muted, a little more subtle, and I'm not sure if they're trying to play to the minimalist trend that's been going around, but that also kind of inspired me to go with a lighter palette because that seemed to be more in line with what's current, especially since apparently this year's Pantone color is coral. And so even though this is more pink, it does still have that corally pastel undertone to it. I'm just going in and blocking in the highlights for the hair with a very light pinkish white. And then going in with the acrylic brush to blend out where the highlights fade into the shadows. And you can see where the hair is sectioned out. I do go back in to the top layer where the liner actually is and use the dark gray to overlay where the lines are to kind of get rid of some of those lines, because once I'm finished with the hair I don't need those lines. Essentially, usually when I do hair I actually do it on a different layer, just because when I do the liner for the hair it's more of a guideline than an absolute. And so I end up either getting rid of it altogether or blending colors in over where the liner initially was, like I do in this piece, taking that dark gray and then smudging out the lines where the hair kind of sections itself off near the part. And then adding a texture brush with the white again. I do apologize if my voice sounds a little froggier in today's video. I haven't been feeling quite top-notch, and I actually ended up staying up really late to edit this, so I probably sound a little more tired. I'll try to be a little more upbeat for the next video. And so here I'm using the burn and dodge tool with a little bit of airbrush. For this shirt I wanted it to have a sort of satiny, silky finish. So I start with the darkest that I'm willing to go with the shirt, with the exception of where I've gotten under the rib cage and then under the breastbone, and using the dodge tool to put in the highlights along the edge of her sleeve and along the highest part of the chest. And then I kind of do the same thing with the skirt, where I'm using the darkest tone and then go in with a lighter brush, but that's a little bit later. For the fan, I wanted it to have kind of a transparent, to mimic the transparency that I later do in her hands, and for that I just use a light, a dark, and then I use the blur tool to give the fan some texture, and then I go back in to add the wispy lace on top, and then some details to the fan later. And with this, I'm using the splatter brush set to smudge to give it that splatter effect there, and then I'm going back into the hair and doing the acrylic texture with the smudge tool as well. Adding in the details to the rips at the end of the shirt. With the organs, I use pretty much the same technique that I use with the hair, in that I start with the darkest color and then I work my way up to the light, and I also integrate shades from the rest of the picture. Like, the darkest part of the organ ends up being about the same color as her glove, and I use a texture tool to blend that in to give it some depth and volume. And then I used the pale pink from the background and then the really pale pink from her hair to do the highlights on the organs. And then to further push that, I use the dodge tool, just a little bit of dodge tool on top of that to give it that shiny, slimy, organy situation. And then here I'm just blocking out where I want the rest of the gore to be. I do go back in with a darker brush so that it doesn't end up looking as corn syrupy. And then I use the same dark red that I had on the gloves to do a little bit of splatter, very small splatter, around the edges of the organs here as well. And then just airbrushing some lighter red. And then adding in the volume for the skirt. And of course with the eyebrows I'm doing the same technique that I used for the hair, starting dark and working light, because especially when your character has like paper pale skin like this one does, you kind of want to work from dark to light. When your character has a little bit of blood in the cheeks, as you will, a little bit of actual skin tone, it's not as necessary, but you do want to add that differentiation so it doesn't just look like just a speck of white sitting on their skin, like an awkward highlight. And then I do go in with the makeup using a little bit of pink from the fan, just to give her some subtle blush to make her look like maybe she could still be alive despite the fact that her guts are spilling out here. The next step, I am using my 33% eraser to go in and give the figures that transparent ghostly effect. I kind of go in with the sides as well, and now I'm just adding details to the fingernail, giving her some long clear acrylics. I like the idea of her having a more subdued makeup palette. I had played with the idea of going more crazy with it, but ended up with this one really liking it. And so now we have the finished piece. I hope you all enjoyed this video. See you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in and have a weird day.